The kick wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was swift, sharp, and full of a kind of rage that had learned to wear a badge. Her body crumpled in slow motion, arms instinctively wrapping around her belly as she hit the sidewalk. Passers-by gasped. A child screamed. But the man in uniform, Officer Meeks, stood tall, hand hovering near his holster, eyes scanning the crowd like he was owed silence. "You people need to learn how to listen," he muttered, as if her pain was an inconvenience. If you're ready to hear the truth that won't let go, click, like, subscribe, and get comfortable. This is not just a story. It's a blow that shook the system, and it will stay with you forever. She hadn't resisted. She hadn't even spoken back. Renae Morrison was 27, 8 months pregnant, and walking home from a community prenatal class in South Central Los Angeles when she was stopped for obstructing the sidewalk. What she hadn't done was move fast enough for Meeks's liking when he ordered her to step aside. The sidewalk was wide. Her presence had harmed no one. But in Meeks's eyes, that quick, practiced flicker of authority scanning her dark skin, her braided hair, her swelling belly, she was already guilty of defiance. She'd smiled, politely even, murmured something about just getting by. He called that sarcasm. Then came the shove. Then came the kick. The pain shot through her, but it wasn't what made her cry out. It was the realization. This wasn't about control or public order. It was about power. She wasn't seen as a woman, not a mother, not a person, just something to dominate. And that kind of lesson, she knew, often came with bruises. But what Meeks didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that across the street, through the tinted windows of an unassuming SUV, someone was watching, recording, remembering. The man inside hadn't planned to stop. He was en route to a city council briefing. But when he saw the officer step toward the pregnant woman with a hand on his belt and fury in his eyes, something told him to pull over. He hit record before the kick, before the scream. He knew what he was looking at, and he knew the price of silence. As Renae lay gasping on the sidewalk, the crowd slowly reanimated. A woman ran to shield her from further harm. A man shouted, "What's your badge number?" And somewhere in the blur of adrenaline and outrage, Meeks realized this wasn't going to disappear. Not like the others. Not this time. Across the street, the camera kept rolling. Because this was no longer just an incident. It was a reckoning, and it had just begun. Raymond Carter had been a federal investigator for 15 years. He'd seen footage of police brutality, buried complaints, edited body cam tapes, the usual ghosts of American justice. But this, what he just filmed on his lunch break, felt personal. It wasn't just a bad cop. It was a system on full display, indifferent, brutal, and convinced of its own immunity. He sat still in the SUV, letting the video run a few seconds longer before hitting stop. Across the street, Officer Meeks barked at the onlookers. "Step back." Everyone stepped back now. His voice cracked with something between desperation and command. But the fear wasn't on the sidewalk anymore. It had jumped back onto the badge. Raymond's hand hovered over his phone. He could send this straight to internal affairs. But he didn't. Not yet. IA was notorious for leaking, and not to the press. He needed more than a video. He needed truth with a paper trail. He stepped out of his vehicle slowly, tucking the phone into the inside pocket of his blazer. He crossed the street without speaking, weaving through the gathering crowd. Paramedics had arrived. One knelt beside Renae, her face pale but alert. She was whispering something. A name, maybe. A number. "Sir, you can't be here," an officer told him. Not Meeks, another, younger. Eyes nervous. Raymond pulled his badge. Federal Oversight. Civil Rights Division. The officer stiffened, read the ID, and stepped aside. Raymond knelt near Renae. "Ma'am, my name is Raymond Carter. I saw what happened. I need to ask, do you want to file a complaint?" Her eyes fluttered. Her hand gripped her belly. "Don't trust the complaint box," she whispered. "They shred them." "My cousin," she tried. Raymond's gut twisted. "Okay, then we go higher. You're not alone." Behind him, Meeks had started to retreat, whispering into his radio. He saw Raymond now, and he didn't like it. "What's your name?" Raymond called out. The officer turned halfway. "What's it to you?" "I saw you kick a pregnant woman," Raymond said evenly. "So now it's everything to me." The crowd hushed. The line had been drawn. Meeks sneered. She resisted. "No," said a woman in the crowd. She cried. That's all she did. A teenager held up his phone. "I got the whole thing too. Different angle." And just like that, the story spread. Within hours, the video hit social media. By nightfall, Renae's name was trending. But Raymond wasn't watching the headlines. He was reading the officer's file, and what he found next would shift the case from assault to conspiracy. Officer Darren Meeks had complaints. Not just one or two, 17. 17 formal complaints over the course of 9 years, all buried under layers of departmental silence. Excessive force, racial bias, improper conduct during arrests. Every time a report was filed, it disappeared behind the same 3 words, resolved internally. Raymond Carter sat in his home office long after midnight, the blue light of his laptop washing over files he wasn't technically supposed to have. The whistleblower inside LAPD, a young clerk named Jalen who owed Raymond a favor, had sent him a folder marked Meeks_D internal logs. What Raymond found in it was worse than anything he'd expected. One complaint dated back to 2018. A black teenage boy tackled on his own porch after Meeks mistook him for a burglary suspect. The boy suffered a fractured wrist. Meeks wrote in his report that the suspect resisted and appeared threatening. Body cam footage mysteriously malfunctioned. No charges were filed against the boy or Meeks. Another, in 2021, was from a Latina woman who'd been stopped for a broken taillight. Meeks reportedly searched her without cause, and when she questioned him, he handcuffed her in front of her daughter. The case was flagged by a community liaison, and then vanished into a black hole of pending review. Now, with Renae's case breaking open, Raymond could see the pattern. Meeks wasn't an outlier. He was the prototype of a broken system, one that rewarded fear and punished empathy. But something else caught his eye. In the internal logs, a recurring signature appeared under the reviewing officer line, Lieutenant Nathan Stokes. He was the one who'd closed nearly every complaint. And Stokes didn't just oversee Meeks's reviews, he mentored him. Raymond scribbled the name in his notebook. This wasn't just about Meeks. It was about who protected him. He opened a second window on his screen, started a timeline. Victims, complaints, missing footage, internal memos. A conspiracy map began to form, threads connecting cops, commanders, and even a deputy city attorney who'd waved off a misconduct suit as community exaggeration. At the center of it, Officer Darren Meeks. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. Inside, Raymond leaned back in his chair, the weight of what he now knew pressing against his ribs like a hand. He was in deep. And tomorrow, he'd go deeper. Because there was one more name he hadn't seen in the files, but he suspected he would soon. The name of the district attorney. The courthouse cafeteria was almost empty when Raymond spotted her, Assistant District Attorney Fallon Reese. Sharp suit, low heels, hair pulled into a tight coil at the nape of her neck. She moved like someone who knew exactly where not to step. But Raymond had been in the game too long to let small details slide. He approached with caution, his phone already recording in his pocket. "ADA Reese," he said gently. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up from her coffee, one eyebrow raised. "Depends on the question." Raymond slid into the seat across from her. "I'm here about Officer Darren Meeks." Her expression barely changed, but her fingers tightened around the paper cup. "I've been going through complaint logs. 17 in total. Most closed under Lieutenant Stokes. But one, 2019, had your initials on the declination report. A woman named Denise Rogers. Broken wrist. Claimed Meeks forced her from her car during a traffic stop. No drugs, no weapon, no resistance." Fallon exhaled. "You're digging in places nobody likes to visit, Mr. Carter." Raymond Carter. Federal civil rights. That did it. She sat straighter. "So this is official?" Raymond didn't blink. "Not yet. I'm off duty. For now." She hesitated. Denise Rogers' complaint didn't vanish. It was suppressed. "Lieutenant Stokes called me directly. Said Meeks was a good cop. Just rough around the edges." The city had no appetite for drama that year. There were riots in Westlake. Everyone was on edge. They buried her case under public fatigue. Raymond leaned in. "Did you sign it knowing it wasn't legitimate?" Fallon stared at him, no denial in her eyes. "I signed it knowing I had no choice. You know how this works." "I do," Raymond said. "That's why I also know there's always a choice." Fallon's jaw flexed. "And what's yours, Mr. Carter? You gonna save the system from itself?" Raymond pulled out a small flash drive. "This is the footage of Meeks kicking a pregnant woman. It's already been uploaded to 5 secure locations. But this version," he tapped the drive, "has audio enhancement and timestamps. He kicked her. He knew she was pregnant. He didn't care." Fallon stared at the drive like it might explode. "What do you want from me?" I want access to the DA's misconduct archive. I want your help identifying the cases Stokes interfered with. And I want you to testify if it comes to that. She laughed once, bitterly. That's not a request. That's a career funeral. Raymond nodded slowly. And how many funerals have we buried already because people said nothing? Fallon didn't speak right away. Then she reached out and slid the flash drive into her purse. I'll need 72 hours, she said. Raymond rose. You've got 48. As he left, she watched him go, not with fear, but with something more dangerous. Resolve. Because if Fallon Reese was about to fall, she was taking the whole rotten house with her. Renae Morrison woke to the rhythmic beeping of a fetal monitor. The room smelled of antiseptic and soft linens. A nurse adjusted her four-line, humming faintly. Across the dim hospital room, her mother sat in a plastic chair, hands clasped like a silent prayer. She was alive. Her baby was alive. But something in her had shifted. She no longer felt safe in her own skin. The doctor had told her the baby was healthy. A miracle, really. The kick had missed the uterus by inches. A few more pounds of pressure, a different angle, and the outcome could have been catastrophic. But Renae didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the wall, teeth clenched against a storm she hadn't asked for. A police liaison came by, not to apologize, to document her version of events. He never wrote down her full sentence when she said, "He looked at me like I was an animal." He just nodded and said, "We'll look into it." Her cousin brought soup. Her neighbor brought flowers. Her pastor brought a prayer. But what she needed was protection. Late that night, a nurse slipped in with a folded note. No name, just a message. You don't know me, but I know what happened. I'm a federal investigator, and I saw everything. I'm making this case public. You are not alone. Renae read it 3 times, fingers trembling. For the first time in days, her breath came out in a full exhale. She looked at her belly. The baby kicked softly. A reminder, not everything that kicks is trying to hurt you. Her mother stirred beside her. You okay, baby girl? Renae nodded. No, but I'm getting there. Outside her room, a reporter waited by the ER entrance. She'd heard whispers of a viral video, a federal witness, a cover-up unraveling. And inside the city, Darren Meeks was being pulled from active duty. Officially for routine evaluation. Unofficially, it was because the mayor's office had started to feel the heat. But the truth was out now. And Renae Morrison, a name once just whispered through hospital halls, was becoming a symbol of survival, of resistance, of what happens when the whole world finally sees and refuses to look away. The walls of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge were lined with old photographs, black and white portraits of men in uniform, arms crossed, expressions severe. Officer Darren Meeks stood beneath them now, face flushed, shirt collar wrinkled, fury rising in his throat like bile. They want to suspend me, he barked. I followed procedure. She refused a lawful order. Across the conference table, Union President Martin Keeley didn't blink. A former beat cop turned political dealmaker, Keeley had weathered his share of scandals. His job wasn't to protect the law. It was to protect the Brotherhood. They suspended you, he said flatly. Effective immediately. Meeks slammed a fist on the table. That video's out of context. That woman, she mouthed off. She looked smug, like she knew I couldn't touch her. Keeley leaned forward. And then you did. Silence. We've covered a lot for you, Darren, Keeley continued. The Rogers case. That body cam malfunction in 2021. Hell, we even paid for your civil suit attorney last year. But this, he tapped his phone. You kicked a pregnant black woman. In daylight. On camera. That's not a story we can bury. That's a headline that's already halfway to DC. Meeks sneered. So what? You throwing me under the bus now? No, Keeley said. I'm offering you a lifeline. But it comes with conditions. Meeks stared. Keeley slid a folder across the table. Inside were names. A list of every officer under Lieutenant Nathan Stokes who had received misconduct complaints. Keeley's voice lowered. You want out of this? Start talking. Start pointing. You want me to flip? Keeley's voice hardened. I want this storm off my doorstep. You want to stay on the payroll? You give me Stokes. You give me Reese. Anyone who gave the green light. Meeks looked down at the folder, then at the photos on the wall. The Brotherhood had always protected him. Until now. He swallowed. I want immunity, he said. And I want the record sealed when this is over. Keeley nodded. You get me what I need, and we'll talk. As Meeks left the lodge, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voice whispered, "You don't know who's watching, officer. But we know where you've been." Meeks froze. The hunters were closing in. And now, the hunted had a choice: take the fall, or burn the forest down with him. Fallon Reese sat in her apartment, staring at an unopened bottle of wine and a manila envelope. The envelope had arrived that morning. No return address, just her name scrawled in block letters. Inside were photocopies of sealed misconduct complaints, annotated with handwritten notes. At the top, "Your father would be ashamed." It was a low blow, but an accurate one. Fallon had grown up watching her father pin his badge to his uniform with reverence. He walked her to school every morning, stopped for coffee at the same corner diner, and taught her that the badge was a promise, not of authority, but of service. He died on duty when she was 14. Heart failure, not heroics. But the city buried him like a saint. She joined the DA's office to honor him. And somewhere along the way, she'd started trading principles for position. One overlooked file here. One closed case there. Always with the whisper from above, "Be smart, Fallon. Don't make waves." Now she was drowning in them. She called Raymond Carter. He picked up after one ring. "I got your message," she said. "And I have something for you. Talk. I'm sending you a folder. You'll want to sit down for it." Inside were 5 names, all officers under Stokes. All with complaints that never reached prosecution. One in particular stood out: Officer Neil McKenzie. He was the responding officer in a 2017 case where a black teenager died during a routine stop. The autopsy said heart failure. The photos said trauma. Fallon remembered the boy's mother. She'd begged Fallon for answers. Fallon had filed it under no prosecutorial merit and moved on. Now it burned her fingers. "I want to flip the switch," she told Raymond. "But I need you to protect me." Raymond didn't hesitate. "You testify, and I make you federal witness status. They come after you, they're coming after the government." She paused. "You really think one case can bring it down?" Raymond's voice was steady. "No, but one voice can start the collapse." Fallon hung up and stared at the photos of the suppressed cases again. Young men, broken mothers, a city that had learned to forget its dead. She poured the wine and didn't drink it. Instead, she opened her laptop and began writing her resignation letter. At the top, she typed, "To whom it may concern. I was complicit, but not anymore." Down the block, a black sedan idled for the second night in a row, watching her window. But Fallon didn't flinch, because the system that once welcomed her was about to feel the heat of her silence finally breaking. The office of Lieutenant Nathan Stokes smelled like polished wood, stale coffee, and secrets. He sat behind his desk and pressed blues, flipping through a file while pretending not to notice the tremble in his hand. Darren Meeks had gone silent. Fallon Reese was missing from her post. And now, a federal subpoena was on its way to his inbox. They were coming. He opened the lower drawer of his desk, not the one with duty rosters or officer evaluations, but the one no one else had the key to. Inside were 6 flash drives labeled only by numbers and 1 blackened notebook. These were the burn files, unofficial logs of complaints, internal reviews, and the little side notes officers never expected to see on paper. "Keep this one quiet. Family knows, Councilman." Handled off record. Stokes pulled out the notebook, its leather edges worn thin. On the 3rd page, 2019, D. Meeks, Rogers complaint. Shredded. ADA warrant. On the 5th, Fallon R. pushed to decline McKenzie review. Pressure applied by DA Campbell. He stared at the names, each one a rung on the ladder he'd climbed. But now the ladder was on fire. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. A voice smooth, low. "They flipped Reese. Meeks is caving. If your house isn't clean, get a match and walk away." Click. Stokes stood abruptly. His office window looked down over the precinct's back lot. He had options. Not good ones, but options. That's when Captain Johanna Ruiz stepped in. Ruiz wasn't internal affairs. She was legacy blue, but different. She'd grown up in the South Side, wore her badge like armor, not a crown. And she'd been watching Stokes for years. She tossed a printed copy of the Rogers complaint on his desk. "You know where this came from, Lieutenant?" He didn't answer. She tossed another, then another, stamped across each in red, sealed. "Unauthorized destruction. You covered for him. For years." Stokes scoffed. "This is politics. You want me out because you want the desk." Ruiz didn't flinch. "I want integrity. And I'm not the only one." She nodded to the door. Behind it, a cluster of officers waited. Young, brown, black, white. all of them fed up with the stain Meeks had left on their shield. "They're ready to testify," Ruiz said. "You can be the last line of silence, or the first name to break the chain." Stokes looked at the files, then at her. His mouth opened and closed. He didn't speak again, just reached into the drawer and handed over the notebook. "I want immunity," he said. Ruiz nodded. "You'll get your day in court." Outside, the sirens weren't wailing yet, but the reckoning was underway. And for the first time in his career, LT. Nathan Stokes wasn't covering anything up. He was surrendering. Darren Meeks sat in an interrogation room painted the color of denial pale green, meant to soothe. It didn't work. He'd been here before, on the other side of the table, coaxing confessions from scared kids and shaky men. But now, the silence pressed on him like water in a sinking ship. Across from him sat Raymond Carter. No notes. No recorder. Just a pen and a yellow legal pad. Meeks scoffed. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," Raymond said. "But this meeting isn't about guilt. It's about gravity." Meeks leaned back. "You think I'm scared?" Raymond didn't answer. Instead, he placed a single photo on the table, Renae Morrison, unconscious on the sidewalk, her belly swollen with life, blood matting the edge of her dress. "You're not scared," Raymond said. "But you're not stupid either. That's what makes this worse." Meeks looked away. Raymond slid a second photo across the table, Lieutenant Stokes in handcuffs, flanked by 2 internal affairs agents. Then a third, Fallon Reese in a press room, speaking to a microphone with fire in her eyes and grief in her voice. "They're all talking," Raymond said. "They're telling us who enabled what, who silenced who. And your name is everywhere." "You think I was the only one?" Meeks snapped. "You think I kicked her out of nowhere? They trained us to escalate. We were told not to show weakness." Stokes said hesitation gets you killed. Raymond nodded slowly. "And what gets pregnant women kicked in the street?" Silence. "You still think this ends in a pension?" Raymond asked. "You're not a soldier. You're a scapegoat. They're already rewriting your story. If you don't speak now, the last words about you will be written by people cleaning up the mess you made." Meeks' jaw twitched. "I want a deal." "You'll get one. Minimum sentence. Protective custody. But you name everyone. Every sealed complaint. Every lost body cam. Every call from the DA's office. You testify, and you might get a shot at rebuilding what little life you'll have left. And if I don't?" Raymond leaned forward, eyes sharp as a blade. "Then the world sees the footage, the notes, the files. And your name becomes a cautionary tale. A headline. A warning." Meeks looked down at the photo again. Renae. Crumpled. Breathless. Bruised. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he whispered. "You did," Raymond said. "Now decide who else you're going to take with you." A beat passed. Then Meeks picked up the pen. Outside the room, Fallon waited. She saw Raymond step out, his face unreadable. He gave a nod. And just like that, the wall of silence cracked wider. The badge still gleamed. But beneath it, the rot was showing. The press conference wasn't Renae's idea. It was Fallon's. And Raymond's. And a dozen community leaders who told her, "You don't owe them your voice. But it might save someone else." The City Hall rotunda was packed, cameras, microphones, reporters with notepads and sharpened questions. They expected tears. They expected fragility. They expected a victim. What they got was a woman who had nearly lost everything and still stood. Renae approached the podium slowly. The room hushed. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with fury carefully restrained. "My name is Renae Morrison," she began. "I am 27 years old. I'm a mother. And on May 18th, I was kicked by a police officer for walking while pregnant and black." Gasps rippled. Pins moved. "I didn't resist. I didn't argue. I walked. I breathed. And for that, I was treated like a threat." She paused, gathering herself. Her voice never cracked. "The man who did this wore a badge. But the system that made him feel untouchable? That wore a suit. Sat in a courtroom. Shredded my name behind desks." She looked down, then back up, not at the reporters, but at the people behind the cameras. Mothers. Students. Survivors. "You know what I learned in the hospital," she said. "That my baby's heart kept beating, even when mine felt like it stopped. That survival is an act of rebellion. That silence is the safest weapon they use against us." The room was so still you could hear a lens click. "I came here today not to make a statement, but to demand a reckoning. For every mother who cried alone. For every name that never made it past the headlines. For every badge that hid a lie." A reporter raised a hand. "Ms. Morrison, what justice looks like to you?" She didn't hesitate. "Justice isn't Meeks going to prison," she said. "It's making sure no one else gets trained to be him. Behind her, Raymond stood with folded arms. Fallon was beside him, face pale but proud. The mayor watched from a corner of the hall, the weight of public opinion tipping against him. And outside, on the courthouse steps, a vigil had begun. Not for the dead, but for the living. Candles, posters, chants. A city that had finally stopped pretending it couldn't see. Renae stepped down from the podium, the cameras still flashing. She didn't cry. She didn't collapse. She walked straight into the arms of her mother. And the crowd began to chant one word, over and over, like a promise. Justice. 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 District Attorney Wallace Campbell had survived political storms before. Election smear campaigns, leaked emails, even a short-lived corruption probe. But this one was different. This time, the evidence didn't whisper. It screamed. In the sealed conference room on the 12th floor of the Hall of Justice, he sat across from two federal investigators, a silent assistant U.S. attorney, and his own defense counsel. The walls felt thinner than they used to. The ceiling lights flickered just slightly, or maybe it was just his vision. Raymond Carter stood at the head of the table. You signed off on at least 8 prosecutorial declinations involving officers later found to have serious misconduct complaints, Raymond said, voice cold. All of them with clear racial bias patterns. All of them connected to the same internal review system run by Lieutenant Nathan Stokes. Campbell ran a hand over his jaw. We didn't have enough to prosecute. Or you didn't want to lose support from the union, Fallon added from her seat. Her voice was steadier now, colder. She wasn't whispering anymore. You let them run the DA's office like a precinct. Watch it, counselor, muttered Campbell's attorney. Raymond laid out a document. This is your resignation letter. With it, you avoid indictment for now. You walk away. Quietly. If not, he dropped another folder, this one labeled, Federal Criminal Complaint. Negligent oversight resulting in civil rights violations. You're bluffing, Campbell said. Raymond leaned in. I'm not. The assistant U.S. attorney finally spoke. You have until midnight. Campbell looked around the room. No allies. No cover. His hand trembled slightly as he picked up the resignation form. I was trying to keep the city from falling apart, he muttered. Fallon stared him down. You let people bleed to keep the walls clean. He signed. Within the hour, a press statement was issued. D.A. Campbell steps down citing personal reasons. It didn't fool anyone. Not anymore. Fallon exited the building into a crush of microphones. Her heel struck the pavement like punctuation. No comment, just a nod. Inside, Raymond folded the complaint and tucked it back into his case. The bigger fish had been caught, but there were others still swimming, still watching. And not all of them were ready to surrender. Because while the district attorney had fallen, the machinery he helped build still churned, slower now, but not yet broken. Deep in the archives of the LAPD's Downtown Records Division, an unassuming file clerk named Deshaun Booker made the mistake of caring. He was supposed to shred them. That was the instruction. Old cases. Non-actionable. Clerical overflow, they called it. But when he saw the names, he paused. Again and again, the same officers. Meeks, McKenzie, Torres. Always tied to missing footage. Unfiled complaints. Unprosecuted abuse. Deshaun didn't have power. What he had was pattern recognition. And a scanner. For the last 6 months, he'd been quietly archiving files marked for destruction. He saved them to a private cloud, labeled only by numbers and dates. No folder names. No flags. Just pure, unfiltered truth waiting to be decoded. When he saw the press conference with Renae Morrison, something clicked. A fire lit in his gut. This wasn't just about paper trails. It was about whose lives got erased. He reached out to the only name he trusted from the news, Fallon Reese. They met in a laundromat at midnight, the machines humming like white noise conspirators. He wore a Dodgers cap low over his face. She wore a hoodie, her badge clipped inside her pocket. This is everything they thought nobody would ever read, Deshaun said, handing over a hard drive. Chain of custody records. Suppressed internal memos. Officer transfers after misconduct. Even audio logs from precinct locker rooms. Fallon opened the drive on her tablet. Her breath caught. Here were voices, real, raw, laughing about beatings, mocking victims, bragging about cleaning up complaints. Names. Dates. Quotes that would shatter careers if spoken aloud. This, she whispered, is the whole damn spine of the system. Deshaun leaned back. So what are you going to do with it? Fallon didn't hesitate. Burn it down. The next day, she walked into a federal oversight hearing and handed the drive to Raymond Carter under oath. It's not just Meeks, she told the committee. It's how many Meeks they manufactured. The drive would become Exhibit A in a sweeping civil rights lawsuit filed by the Department of Justice. The scope: systemic suppression of misconduct, racial targeting, and unlawful internal cover-ups. Over 50 officers named. For senior officials already under review. The chain of custody had been broken. Now, it was being reconnected piece by piece. And the records they tried to erase were about to become the very evidence that held them accountable. By the time the federal case opened, the city had changed. Protest banners had faded in the sun, but not the fury behind them. Murals of Renae Morrison appeared on brick walls across South LA, her eyes defiant, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The image became a symbol, not a victimhood, of vigilance. Inside the courtroom, 12 jurors, black, white, Latino, Asian, old, young, sat in stillness. Their eyes flicked between lawyers, witnesses, and a growing stack of damning evidence. But what struck them most wasn't what they saw. It was what they heard. A young black boy, no more than 16, testified, "He slammed me against my own gate. Said I looked out of place. I lived there." His voice didn't crack, but his hands trembled. A mother sobbed on the stand. "They told me the tape was unavailable, that my son must have fought back. But he was in braces. He couldn't even run." Then Renae. She stood in the witness box, shoulders back, every breath a statement. She told them how the air left her body, how she felt her child shift inside her, how she lay bleeding while strangers filmed, and an officer called her a liability. "They don't see us as human," she said quietly. "They see us as problems to be neutralized." The defense tried to pivot, claimed stress, protocol, a system under pressure. But the room didn't buy it. Not anymore. Raymond Carter presented the files, Deshawn's archive. The judges didn't stop him. The jury leaned in. Pages flicked. Photos passed. Voices echoed. And with each testimony, the jury's silence grew heavier, sharper. Then came Fallon's moment. She rose from her seat, walked to the center of the courtroom, and said, "I was part of it. I signed the silence. But silence is complicity. So today, I testify not as a former prosecutor, but as a citizen finally waking up." The courtroom stood still. On the final day, the judge instructed the jury. And when they returned, guilty. Guilty of systemic suppression. Guilty of civil rights violations. Guilty of obstruction. Guilty of conspiracy. One by one, the names fell like dominoes. Meeks convicted. Stokes convicted. D.A. Campbell disbarred. Captain Ruiz promoted to Chief of Internal Reform. Outside the courthouse, people waited. Some crying. Some singing. Many just standing, bearing witness. Renae didn't cheer. She didn't wave. She simply stepped into the sunlight, closed her eyes, and exhaled. Not because the fight was over, but because, for once, someone had finally listened. Spring came late to Los Angeles that year. The rain lingered, the sky stayed gray. But inside the maternity wing of St. Agnes Hospital, the air was filled with a quiet kind of hope, the kind that slips in after the storm, soft as breath. Renae Morrison held her newborn against her chest, the infant's tiny fingers curled around hers like a question only she could answer. Her mother stood at the foot of the bed, eyes red, hands folded as if in church. Raymond Carter sat in the corner, exhausted, a rare smile tugging at his mouth. Fallon had brought flowers, not store-bought, but clipped from her own windowsill. "What's his name?" Fallon asked softly. Renae looked down at the boy, his eyes barely open, his chest rising and falling with the fragile defiance of the living. She thought of the kick, of the sidewalk, of the silence that followed, of the voice that rose from inside her that day, not loud but unmoving. "I will not disappear." She'd carried him through a war no child should have to endure. A war she didn't start, one she'd nearly lost her life in. And yet here he was, whole, breathing, undefeated. "His name," she said, "is Justice." Fallon blinked. "First name?" Renae nodded. "Justice. No middle name. No apology." Raymond's voice was low. "That's going to be one hell of a name to live up to." "That's the point," Renae replied. She rocked the baby gently, humming a tune her grandmother used to sing when the lights flickered in winter. Something about how the stars always return, how the sky always clears, how even the darkest nights bend toward the sun. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "Ready for the birth certificate?" Renae took it, wrote the name slowly, firmly. Justice Morrison. Outside the window, the clouds parted for the first time in days. Sunlight filtered through. The child blinked once, as if the light was too much. But he didn't cry. He opened his eyes. And for a brief moment, Everyone in the room believed the world might just change after all. 3 months after the verdict, a file landed on Raymond Carter's desk. No return address. No note. Just a thick envelope sealed with red wax. Inside, a USB stick and a single sentence handwritten on a scrap of yellow paper. He wasn't the only one watching. Raymond plugged in the drive. It contained one video. Grainy, black and white. Date stamped 5 months before Renae Morrison was kicked on that sidewalk. Same officer. Same corner. Different woman. Different outcome. This time, she didn't get up. The incident never made a report. No complaint. No review. Just another day erased by the shadows. But someone had been there. Someone had filmed it. Someone had waited until now. Raymond sat still, heart slowing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. He forwarded the footage to Fallon, who was now overseeing the new Public Integrity Bureau. She responded with one word: understood. That night, Raymond walked the block where it all began. The sidewalk had changed. Where Renae had fallen, there was now a mural, bright blues and golds. Justice Morrison cradled in her arms, eyes looking not at the ground, but forward. A teenager stood nearby, phone out, live streaming for his followers. Raymond approached. You knew her? The teen nodded. Everybody does now. She made him look. You one of the lawyers? Something like that. The kid grinned. Well, you missed it. But not this time. He pointed to the camera. We don't stop filming anymore. And Raymond understood. Justice didn't arrive when the system caught up. Justice arrived the moment someone hit record. Because the truth wasn't just in what they did. It was in who watched, and who refused to look away. The kick that shook the city had been just one moment. But moments don't end. They ripple. They rise. They reveal. Somewhere, a badge sat unworn. A courtroom stood quiet. A mother held her child. And on a quiet Los Angeles block, beneath a mural painted in pain and defiance, the world didn't forget. Not this time.